Welcome to our weekly podcast show. We're here at the University of Rio Grande and this isn't written right. This is the podcast show for the University of Rio Grande and OSU South Centers. Each week we feature a Southern Ohio small business or student or faculty or administrator at the University of Rio Grande or community. We also feature program managers from Ohio State University South Centers, Southern Ohio Community Economic and Development Programs, and community organizations, and other special guests. Our mission is simple: to promote the University of Rio Grande and its diverse educational programs, to promote the Ohio State University South Centers and its many business, technology programs, and finally to promote Southern Ohio, a great place to live, learn, and enjoy life to the fullest.
If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to Business Talk. We're here on the deserted campus of the University of Rio Grande this week. We are now on holiday break and moving forward to Christmas and the New Year, and campus is deserted, Mike. I walked across and didn't see a soul.
I shouldn't be here.
You're right. Neither one of us should be here. But regardless,
we are
dedicated absolutely to the show. I'd like to send out a get well wish to Patrick Dengel, our co-host. He tried to make it. He was in here for the first part of the show, and he just was not feeling well at all. We sent him to urgent care, so our best wishes to him. I do believe this is the first show that we've done without Patrick.
That's the first one I've witnessed.
And I'm pretty sure it's because he doesn't trust us to carry on. But that's okay. We'll do it anyway.
Yeah, we'll show him.
Okay. I have the great privilege of introducing our special guest today, Dr. Greg Davis. He is with the Ohio State University. He is with the Extension program, and he is the Assistant Director of Community Development, known as CD program, through OSU Extension. Greg, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, Greg, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself to start the show and then lead into what is community development.
Sounds good. I've been with Extension about 16 or 17 years now. I started in a county office, actually Fulton County in northwestern Ohio, and spent some time in Crawford in north central Ohio. Worked in the northwestern part of the state as a district specialist, and then most recently in the Department of Agricultural, Environmental, and Development Economics in the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Science, and now I'm part of the Extension Community Development Leadership Team.
I know a lot of our listeners, especially in Gallia County, Jackson County, very familiar with the local Extension, probably more familiar with 4-H programs. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the different side of Extension, and that being community development, or CD.
Sure. The community development program really probably dates back into the 40s. The earliest Extension community development work was done in Monroe County, of all places, and it was focused on helping the local economy there. Today, what has evolved is an Extension program that's it's not only strong and vibrant in Ohio, but it's part of a nationwide network. In Ohio, we've got approximately 20 full-time community development extension professionals, and about half of those work in counties and the other half work on a regional or statewide basis. The kinds of programs that community development is involved in involves leadership, involving primarily local officials and community leaders. We do a lot of economic development work, which would involve chambers of commerce, industrial development organizations, community improvement corporations, county commissioners, and the like. We do a good bit of work in the area of land use, so we'll work with county and regional planning commissions, regional development organizations, and then we do a good bit of work in what we call organizational development, where we're working with a lot of nonprofit groups. It might be a quasi-governmental agency, and the goal there is to help them make more efficient use of their limited resources.
So we talked a little bit before the show about the last 100 years of Extension. How have things changed?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. There's a big anniversary coming up in 2014, so we will be celebrating our 100th year then. And in doing so, we'll have a book put together on the history of Ohio State's extension program since 1913. And so, actually, I should correct that. Our first extension agent was hired in 1913, so it was actually before the official creation of the extension service. The federal legislation that created the funding mechanism to actually fund this thing we call extension happened in 1914 with the Smith-Lever Act. And so that's what we're celebrating in 2014 with this book, among other things. I've had a chance to look at the draft chapter on community development over the last 100 years. And in doing so, I realized that many of the things that we have worked on since the early days of extension community development, going back to the 40s, really the last 60 years, the issues have remained relatively constant. Now, the way we go or have gone about addressing them might have changed somewhat.
I was going to say, why haven't you solved it?
Yeah, we're still working. We're still working diligently with our community partners and statewide and regional organizations on issues that are very similar to what these communities and the people that live in them have been facing for decades.
Well, I think a lot of that goes back to, if you think about your community, your leaders, they change every 4 years or 8 years. When a new administration comes in, they start over and they need the direction. How am I going to solve these problems?
Absolutely. And the economics of I don't know what the cycle is, the economics of a community change, whatever, 20 years or something. Somebody else moves in and you've got to adapt to it. So you're always moving ahead with these issues.
Yeah, you talk about the turnover in community leadership. We actually have a program that was developed by a colleague of mine who was not only a village official but a municipal official, was on the city council, and so he had experience not only in the position of that local leadership, but now as an extension professional dealing with local leaders. And so what he has done is develop a program, what he calls the newly elected officials workshop. And so typically you have someone who, and he can tell this story very well, you've got someone who runs for public office because of the neighbor's barking dog or the too many cars parked out back.
I'll do something about it.
Absolutely. And so they run for office, they get elected, and then realize, I have no idea what this job's about. And so he's put on this program now for about the last 10 years and has just had wild success of these folks that have been elected to office and really need to get a feel for what the responsibilities and the duties are of that office as per Ohio Revised Code.
I was going to say, what are they most lacking in? The knowledge of how the whole thing operates, or the laws, or
the leadership skills?
It's I would say any and all of the above. So he'll focus on basic communication skills. He'll talk about ways to lead, ways to run a public meeting, when it's appropriate to go behind closed doors and that so-called executive session. He'll talk about the duties and responsibilities of those offices as per Ohio Revised Code, which really is eye-opening, he says, for most of these folks. They really didn't have any idea what they'd gotten themselves into.
So Ohio State has been in the business now for about 100 years. What about other states?
Well, that's a great question. Really, this legislation that created the funding mechanism from the federal government, being federal legislation, it has created extension nationwide. So the system in general, nationwide, will celebrate its 100th anniversary in 2014. So all 50 states, including Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico and other territories. We've got colleagues out on the island of Guam that I see on an annual basis. They're part of the extension system in Guam. We'll all be celebrating that 100th anniversary.
Very good. And I'm assuming they have a lot of the same issues that you have here in Ohio.
Well, yeah, that's a correct assumption. We meet on an annual basis, and one of the things that we do is share. Okay, we call this our annual conference, and so community development extension professionals from all over the country, and I'd say right now we've probably got almost 400 members in this national association. We'll come together, and we might get at least 2/3 of our membership to come together in this conference setting. And what we do is share our what we call the best practices. So, in the case of Ohio, for example, this newly elected official workshop, we might share at that conference and say, look at how this program has worked. Here is or was the issue. You might have a similar issue in your state. And if so, you might want to try this program because here is how it has worked in Ohio. And so not only do we share with our peers that way, but we also then learn from them. So we go knowing that the issues that we're dealing with in Ohio, most likely they're dealing with in their states. And so when we go there and we listen to them and see the things that they've tried and how they work, there's a lot of what we call that multi-state cooperation. And in fact, what we're doing more of, especially with declining financial resources to fund our efforts, we're doing a whole lot more cross-state collaboration. And so one example would be our efforts involving energy and energy development. We've got a small team here in Ohio, and we're working with folks from other states. Michigan would be one, Pennsylvania. We're also learning from our friends in Montana and Colorado that are dealing with issues related to energy as we are.
What kind of energy issues? Would that be a stimulus program, developing things, or what?
No, really the focus of this started with renewable energy, and so we've got a CD educator who's worked in northwestern Ohio in the Van Wert area where there's a very large wind farm, and it actually covers more than 2 counties, the footprint of this wind farm. And so we've focused our efforts on renewable with respect to wind. We've also looked at solar. We've got a decent sized solar field that we've worked with the local community leaders in Wyandotte County. And so these are the kinds of things that we've done then, and we share with our colleagues in other states who are also dealing with issues related to renewable energy. We're also learning from our colleagues in Pennsylvania related to shale gas. And so rather than have each state reinvent the wheel, we're part of this national network where we can share and learn from each other.
So what are some of the issues in non-renewables? Is it the organization setting up? What's happening?
Well, the one thing that we're learning from Pennsylvania is that with respect to the shale gas is that it really helps to have yourself organized before the boom, so to speak. And so in some cases, and I can't remember who said it, it might have been Warren Buffett, you don't want to be the first one in, you want to be the second. And so what we've been able to do is watch Pennsylvania deal with the shale boom in their state, and they're probably 8 years ahead of us. And so we're learning from their mistakes, so to speak. And so one of the things that the state of Ohio has done is update the regulations regarding shale gas energy.
Is that a fracking issue?
It's related to that.
It's related to
Absolutely.
that. Okay.
Yeah. And so
and when you talk about mineral rights, when you're talking about fracking, you're pulling minerals out of the ground that's coming from yours, but also your neighbor's property as well. So whose gas are they pulling out of the ground?
Well, the way these leases typically have worked is that the gas company will take a certain amount of acreage, and so they look at that footprint and they understand how far the drilling will go underground, and so they ensure that the depth and the direction that they drill is no more than the acreage that they've decided to talk to the owners of on the top.
And you just hope that they're right and you can trust them.
Yeah.
And that's where your organization comes in. You want to make sure all your paperwork is set up because inevitably lawsuits occur.
And we've actually done dozens and dozens of workshops in the last probably 2 to 3 years that have involved thousands, literally thousands of Ohio residents, landowners, interested residents, local officials, all trying to get their arms around what does this mean, because we know it's here. And so we talk about those things. What does a lease look like? How do you best protect your own individual rights? How do you make sure that you ensure that the lease that you're signing is in fact a lease that's properly written and structured?
So are you on the company side, or are you on the landowner side, or both?
Typically our approach has been one of education, and so what we try to do in our public meetings is to explain what this issue is all about, and so we can lean back on what we've learned from Pennsylvania, and so we can say, this is what we know, this is what the science says, here are and we've got expertise on staff. We've got a lawyer that's part of the system that has specialized in natural resource development law, and so she's there explaining what a lease should look like, at the same time not offering legal advice. And so really Extension's all about unbiased education. And so what we try to do is take that scientific, unbiased, objective information that we've learned, not only from our own applied research efforts and our own experiences, but also that system nationwide. And that's where that national network really has value.
So who are you available to? I'm assuming that as an educational institution, anyone can access your information, but do you take money for your services?
We do, absolutely. Yeah, we're always
That's good to know.
We're always open to contributions. In fact, I'll answer your first question first. Our services are open to everyone. Okay, so we're funded with federal dollars, state dollars, and local dollars. And so if you're in Gallia County, your local Gallia County Extension office has personnel and resources available to you that are funded from those three sources. And so we used to be called the Cooperative Extension Service, and we're no longer cooperative, now we're just called Extension. But that cooperative term referred to that arrangement between the Gallia, in this case Gallia County Commissioners, the state legislature. We're actually a line item in the state budget. So every 2 years we get an appropriation from our state legislators, and then the federal government through USDA. And so that's really the way that arrangement's funded, and how then we're a service available to everyone in the state. Do we take money? Absolutely. And in fact, a good bit of our work is funded now with what we call grants and contracts. And so because our federal appropriation and our state appropriation have been declining really over the last 10 years, it's been a steady decrease. We're actually down in numbers of educators and faculty, and we're also struggling to reduce the number of programs that we offer. It's difficult. So what we do in certain cases, when there's grant funding available, we may hire someone temporarily. In other cases, we'll use contract with a particular, it might be a particular company or an association, it might be a contract with a community to deliver a specific program. And so rather than incur the cost of a full-time professional, right, to hire someone, it's very much a case-by-case situation where something that's clearly defined in terms of a deliverable can be identified. We'll hire and deliver that particular deliverable on that case-by-case basis.
And maybe the community would pay for that?
Absolutely.
Or organization?
Yeah, and they have. Yeah, we'll do a good bit of project work like that, where they may have a need for a particular kind of a development plan, perhaps, or maybe an economic analysis type of a project. And rather than hire someone, right, that we don't know if we'll be able to keep because of the nature of our funding, we'll say, here's what that particular output will cost. And typically there's a way to put those dollars together to pay for it.
So here in Gallia County, we have our 4-H educator and we have our ag educator, and unfortunately now we don't have an educator, like you said, because of budgets for CD. But I understand we have something called a area representative or an area specialist. Is that the individual that would be covering our area for us?
Yeah, and really one of the changes, I mean, when you look back historically over the last 100 years, we started with our first county educator in 1913, and we didn't have all counties covered. It took 16 years, right? The 88th county had its first educator in 1929, so that's 16 years to fill those 88 positions. I would venture to guess that our point in time when we had the most professionals in the field was probably the 80s. I think we probably peaked in the 80s, maybe the 90s, but we've been on a steady decline since. And so one of the ways we've tried to address community needs is through these various types of positions that aren't necessarily county-based. And so, we've created positions that work on a regional basis and even a statewide basis now. And so when you look at community development, that community development programs, I mentioned probably 6 to 8 are county-based, and the other 12 FTEs are not. And so those other positions work throughout the state on a variety of topics that are germane to their specialization.
So who is the point of contact? Your local county office, and then they put you in contact with your state specialist, or is there a direct line to the state?
There's both. Yeah,
Okay.
we try to be receptive to multiple means, and so you can definitely go to your local county office and say, I'm interested in this topic, how can you help? And that local county office should be able to help direct you if they can't help you right then and there. Another way to do that is to contact the state community development office too. We've got an office in Columbus. It's me and an assistant. But what we try to do is coordinate our resources throughout the state from that level. And so if there's a particular issue or concern or topic that needs to be addressed by our community development program area, I can be contacted to identify the means and the methods to do that.
Well, Greg, I'm looking at the clock and we're winding down. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. What other topics would you like to discuss today?
Well, when we talk about this history book, and I had mentioned that I had a chance to take a look at the draft that we're preparing for our 100th anniversary, and when I took a peek at what was in there, it was laid out decade by decade, which was kind of neat. And I'm always a student of history, so I enjoyed it. And I'm also a student of geography, and so the draft that they have to date shows the kinds of issues that were addressed by the people that were employed in these various decades in these different counties. And the one thing that I really enjoyed was noticing how the kinds of issues that we have addressed over time really haven't changed. And I mentioned this earlier, how the issues have remained the same, but the way in which we've addressed them may have changed. And so, just as an example, we've worked in the area of helping communities develop their economy for 60 plus years. And when I look back at the book and I think about what I know, the economy is the overarching theme, but the actual ways that we've tried to help them address it have changed. And so, just as an example, when we started, according to this history book, in the 40s, it was really about industrial development. And so when you think about how the nature of farming has changed, especially over the years, over the last 50 years, the much more labor intensive, right? Go back to the 40s, when we still had small tractors, right? You might have a tractor that it could, in essence,
just a little bit bigger.
Ford, yeah.
Just barely bigger than your lawn tractors are today, right? And those were the biggest tractors that existed. Now think about the tractors today and how much faster, more productive, and efficient the equipment can be. How did that impact our rural economies, right? And so in the 40s, our our first extension educators were focused on helping to diversify these rural economies, because we realized we've got people that can't farm anymore. What are they going to do for employment? And so we focused on industrial development. We focused then on industrial park development in the 60s, right? So we went from trying to create a factory somewhere in a community to now creating an environment, an actual physical environment that would be conducive to attracting industry. By the 1980s, we were included in the Ohio Revised Code to actually serve as a county's economic development office. So see, we're still involved in industrial and economic development, but the way in which we're doing it has changed. And so in the 90s, right after we've gotten this new chapter in Ohio Revised Code enabling us to be involved, now we're developing programs that help community members learn how to conduct an effective site visit. Okay, so if you're local officials in this community, how do you in essence host that first date with a potential industrial prospect? What does that conversation look like? Mm-hmm. What kinds of information do you need to know, and do you need to communicate? And so it's just been neat for me to look at how over time we've been involved in economic development, but the way we've done it has changed. The same, I looked and I lived through this in the late 90s and into the early 2000s. We had a program focused on e-commerce. And so remember how e-commerce was the big thing, and the dot-coms. We always hear about the
Mm-hmm.
dot-com bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Extension had a program to help business owners and operators at all levels try to be more engaged in internet commerce. And so we don't do much of that anymore. We've moved on to other things. Another thing's tourism. From this history book, I've noticed that we've been involved in tourism development. It really happened, again, relating back to the evolving nature of rural economies. What do we do with ag producers who are facing low commodity prices, which we're not dealing with today, but go back into the 50s, right, in the 60s. We were actually working with farmers to help them diversify their business beyond just ag production. And so we were trying to help them understand agritourism. Well, we're doing that again these days now, and we're talking about local food and
Mm-hmm.
and we're talking about wineries. There's a lot of winery production. We're also now talking about hops production at the South Centers. So just those kinds of examples to me really were interesting to see how the people that are involved and the times that we're in change, but the kinds of things that we're focused on over time really have remained relatively constant.
Okay, we've got about a minute and a half. If you were a community leader or just a community member, how would I figure out what you might have to offer me?
It's a great question.
Is it a website? Do
Absolutely.
I call somebody? Or?
Yeah, we've got a website that we've described the kinds of work that we do in a whole lot more detail. We've also got a listing of all of our community development professionals, and so you can read about who we have on staff and their areas of expertise. You can read about their backgrounds, their areas of interest. We've also got very descriptive program web pages. And so if you're interested in a leadership program, for example, you could click on the leadership program link and see the different types of leadership programs that we offer. And at the same time, I need to make sure that you're aware that while we have programs ready to go out of the box, so to speak, we're also very experienced at creating new ones. And so if you have a specific need, we may take something that we've already created and either adapt it to meet your needs, or we may in some cases create something entirely new.
Okay, where was that website that we could see that?
That website is comdev.osu.edu, which would be spelled comdev.osu.edu.
You have been listening to Business Talk with Dr. Greg Davis, Assistant Director of OSU Extension Community Development. And Greg, we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
On behalf of myself, Jason Winters, Mike Thompson, and also Pat Dengel, we thank you for listening and happy holidays.